come to this video trying to get closer to the answer to a question I had asked myself in my notes about a year ago now. What is it about desperation conveyed in art that I enjoy so much? Before I even begin to explore this idea, it's important to understand the concept of desperation we're talking about here. I'm not talking about reveling in the desperation of a family getting by from paycheck to paycheck or enjoying something like Benefit Street. This is a different kind of desperation. It's quite an economic one, and also of course a social and often emotional one too. And although this is worth exploring and breaking down, it's not what my question refers to. Today I'm talking about a specific type of desperation. A type that's born internally and is often emotional. Of course impacted upon by social and economic conditions. But a desperation that is raw and unique to oneself, yet felt by so many. A kind of shared desperation. A one that, as the question says, I enjoy in art. But as it also implies, the desperation I'm almost ashamed to admit that I enjoy. Desperation is defined as a state of despair that typically results in rash or extreme behaviour. But in art this is not the case. It was not rash. It was controlled and specifically created into a sense of the understandable, the human. It loses that sense of otherness, the idea that, oh no, that's not me, they're desperate. By channeling this emotion into a work, you've made it become more accessible and understandable. The desperation that we're talking about is one where you feel it's your own, despite the fact it was the creation of somebody else. You're no longer in a state of despair, as the definition puts it, but a state of heightened consciousness. The rawness and pain makes you feel alive, reminds me of your humanity, your mortality, your flaws. The idea that we enjoy desperation in art is a perverse one. That's probably why it stayed confined to my notes for over a year. But desperation is development, and by living other people's experiences, you can begin to understand your own a bit better. The desperation that I meant when I asked myself this question, it was contingent on its sense of vulnerability, but strangely also its strength. A strength of character to open yourself up in your art, and vulnerability to let yourself lie there and stay in that space longer than you had to. Vulnerability that in fact makes you more vulnerable, but only in that moment. Past that, it becomes to act as a healing. It's this strange cosmic thing to try to describe what I feel when I see a particular video or listen to a particular song. But I think it's often best summed up as a form of desperation. Not a cry for help by any means, a controlled desperation. A promotion of a sense of shared vulnerability. It can have an overriding emotion of anger or sadness or fear. But the constant is this desperation. It's really difficult to explain in words, but I'd often say the best art can be. It's hard to articulate how something makes you feel internally, and for those things that are hard to say, we make art. Out of a place of our vulnerability, or sometimes of desperation. That's why I made this video. An exploration. This idea of shared vulnerability is what I think Philosophy Tube was trying to get at in his new video about climate grief. This idea of the hyper-object. The idea that we're all interconnected with the climate and it's inseparable from us. The same applies to our desperation. But the desperation here should not be framed as thing bad and something to be avoided. But it should be valued alongside any other expression as valid. But more than just valid, essential. Why we enjoy it and consume so much of it is because it taps into our subconscious vulnerabilities and it makes you think. It energizes you into action and it mobilizes you for change. Whether it be emotional strength or political development. It's this sense of shared vulnerability and shared consciousness that brings it into existence. But as I said, it's hard to say, but easy to feel. And once you know it, you'll know it. Because of this, I have left a link to a list of songs in the description that try to evoke this raw sense of desperate beauty, the idea that I'm trying to get at here, and a list of other works that do the same for me. This video was a bit different to my others, but I felt challenged by myself to make it, and whilst compiling them lists, a sentiment I couldn't get out of my head was that of Philosophy Tube. Yep, Philosophy Tube, again, I know. We stan. In his suicide and mental health video. And it clicked. I enjoy the desperation in art because it makes me feel recognised. I feel like I exist more than I did before. It makes you feel alive. And it's through this sense of shared vulnerability that puts us here. I'll leave you with what I hope you can get out of all of this too. A realisation of the self. And it is only once you do this and begin to open yourself up to others, open for you, that you begin to realise the necessity of it. Not just as a coping mechanism, but as a catalyst for change. Not a way of destroying your vulnerabilities, but refining them. I hope you enjoy the works I've left in the description. Please do add more in the comments. And please do remember,
I understand how you feel.